Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
Kill her, Mommy. Kill her.
We'll tear your soul apart.
Live or die. Make your choice.
What are you waiting for, huh? What are you waiting for?
I'm not even gonna swat that fly. I hope they are watching. They'll see. They'll see and they'll know. And they'll say, why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.
They're here.
I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face. The blackest eyes. The devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
Something is moving in the fog.
Who's there?
Something not quite human.
Who is that?
In Halloween, John Carpenter created a night of absolute fear. Now, he has conjured an evil so intense, not even the dawn can drive it away. The Fog, a study in unrelenting terror. Rated R.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Back to the Blockbuster with your host Gaius and Jackson. Jackson is not with us tonight because he's on a busy school schedule, but by the time you hear this episode, you will have heard him on 3 episodes in a row because we recorded episode 198, 199, and 200 all in the same day. Yeah, I had him for a solid day, and I was like, all right, we're gonna take as much advantage of it as we can. But joining us for this latest episode of our Tales of Horror series is Leo from the Films and Fermentation podcast. They've been on the he's been on the show before, and the team's been on the show before, but it has been a while. So thank you for joining me again, Leo. And how are things going?
Everything's going good, man. Yeah, I saw you last time I was on was last Halloween. We did Hellraiser together.
Yeah, that's right.
That was our Hellraiser episode, and before that, my other 2 co-hosts, Mike and Kevin, were on when we did The Dark Knight for the 15th anniversary.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was, and those were those were a lot of fun, and I'm glad that you messaged us when we put up the Tales of Horror stuff again for this year. It's been really fun doing it again. Like you will be, I think so far, unless someone drops out. And not because they didn't want to do it again. Just say, podcasts they get busy and they've had a busier year this year. But I think you're the only returning one from last year. Everyone else has been new so far. So that's a plus as well. But also good for us that new people wanted to do it and that you were also interested in doing it again. But before we get into what movie you picked, just because it's been a while, tell everyone about the Films and Fermentation podcast and anything you got coming up that is interesting. This is your time to pimp out your show and say whatever you want to say.
I'm Leo, and with my friends Mike and Kevin, we co-host the Films and Fermentation podcast. It's a movie and alcohol podcast where we review films and alcoholic beverages, often at the same time, pretty much always at the same time, and it usually leads to interesting conversations that go off the rails here and there. We're also doing our spooky season episodes right now as well. So we just did an episode called Celebrity Vampires, where we talked about celebrities who never seem to age. and this week we are doing an episode on witch movies. We're calling it Hex Appeal. And we have another one coming out. We have one actually coming out tomorrow as of this recording, which would be Tuesday, October 15th. We did a recasting of Young Frankenstein.
Very cool.
casting the film. Yeah, it was a little like we were not sure we wanted to do it because it's such a classic. It's
Yeah.
kind of like a blasphemy to try to recast that film, but it was the 50th anniversary this year, so we thought why not give it a shot. And it turned out to be a pretty fun episode, so that'll be coming out soon.
Nice. It's always a little daunting trying to do stuff like that. I appreciate when people do the recasting stuff, especially when it's for classic movies. We've never toyed with it around on here. We've thought about it. Maybe it's something we'll do in the future. But like, was it a little daunting trying to do it for
Young Frankenstein? Yeah,
yeah.
It was really tough because it was like, how do you fill Gene Wilder's shoes, especially as Young Frankenstein? I found it easy to cast certain characters, but then others were just really difficult. And and then it's the cool thing about doing this with the other two guys is all three of us have our own ideas, and so we all ended up doing somebody different for each role. Nobody had the same person.
Oh, that's cool.
So you get these like interesting, amalgamations of casts that you didn't think of yourself, and it's kind of cool.
Right.
But yeah, it is a little daunting. We've done a few in the past. We've done Tombstone. We've done Clue. We did Ghostbusters at one point. We did one recently where we recast it, a favorite movie of ours using only Muppet characters.
Oh, there we go.
And I did Die Hard. I did Die Hard with Muppets.
Oh, there you go. See that's the kind of route I would want to go. Like not traditionally trying to recast something, but let's like put a spin on it, and that's like the perfect spin.
Something silly.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, those are fun. So that's like a recurring segment for us when we do like a recasting episode. We have other things we do like that are recurring, and then some are just like single topics. Like the one we're doing this week on witches is something we haven't done before. So
nice. Well, we have yet to include booze into any of our episodes. Another thing we talked about just for fun. That's a fun one-off. We almost did it for our 200th episode. Like it was a brief conversation. Like, hey, we should because we don't get to hang out in person like Jackson and I, because he's all the way in Canada and I'm in LA.
Yeah.
But I know I can control myself, but I know myself too when I'm having a good time with someone, even if it was like virtually like this. I'm like, I wanted to do like 2 bullets and like forget what I was doing during the episode or something like that. Hey, but it might make for a fun episode if we both did. So who knows?
It usually ends up being interesting episodes when if one of us goes off the rails, and then but even if the three of us are blitzed during the episode, then it's really an interesting one because then I'm editing it the next day and going, I don't remember saying that.
Oh, we were saying it at all, dude. Yeah, exactly. All right, so tell everyone what movie you chose to do for our Tales of Horror series this year.
So I will never pass up the opportunity to talk about John Carpenter. So when I saw on your list that you had this film on there, I was like, this is, I would say, probably one of his lesser known films. It's one of the ones that I haven't seen in a while myself. So I said this would be an awesome one to check out. So we are doing John Carpenter's The Fog from 1980.
Nice.
And not the shitty remake from 2005. No.
So everyone that doesn't know, there was in the beginning when I emailed the list to Leo, and I had The Fog, and it was so funny because like for some of the lists, I had a remake. I put the year on those movies. Like if it was like if there was 2 When a Stranger Calls on there, I made sure to put like the year of the original and the year of the remake. But for some reason on The Fog, I think I added it later as like an afterthought. It was just like, oh yeah, I want to include that on there just in case. And so by the time the list got to Leo, he wanted to clarify like if it's the original, but not the like 2005 remake. And I was like, oh no. Even though I've told that story to other people who have been on a few episodes as we were preparing for this, they were like, you probably had some fun ripping that apart. I was like, I probably could. Or
I mean, if you want to do an episode where you're shitting on a movie, like that.
Yeah, for the entire time.
Like we've done that plenty of times. We picked a movie that we watched as kids that we were like we loved, and then we rewatched it recently, and we're like, wow, this is a pile of shit. We must have been dumb when we were kids.
Yeah,
and then you end up tearing the movie apart.
Yeah, And this represents. I mean, we did do Halloween 3, and John Carpenter wrote that, but this is
Mhm.
the only one this year. I think that represents him as the director on our list because we did Halloween last year. I think The Thing might have been on the list. I can't remember if I had it on there or not. I know Jackson wanted to do it if he had time, but so far for this series this year, this is the only one as a director that on our show that will represent John Carpenter.
Mhm.
And a good one. I'm glad you picked it because I've said it before on the show. Just talking about his other movies, this is my second favorite John Carpenter movie after Halloween.
Wow.
I know
Yeah.
that I know that me and Jackson like he goes, so we always switch. I think his is like sometimes he goes Halloween the Thing, or depending on his movie, like The Thing Halloween, and then I'm like Halloween the Fog. I never switched those two,
Mhm.
but The Thing is like a close third, and not because I actually might think The Thing might be a better movie overall, but I every time I watch The Fog, and I've made it a part of my spooky season viewing every year for a long time now. I like something more about it every time I watch it again. I just love that.
So
Yeah.
if we have time at the end, I'll give you my full list of John Carpenter films because I've seen all of his
No,
films that he's
please.
directed. I love
Oh,
John
very cool.
Carpenter. He's one of my favorite directors. So he has 19 movies, 19 movies that are theatrical releases. There
Yeah.
are a bunch of films that he directed for TV. There's a bunch of shows that he directed, short films. But as far as like his full length theatrical releases, there are 19, and those are the ones that I've seen and that I have a ranking for because I love John Carpenter. He's by far one of my favorite directors. And
So you and Jackson have that in common. He's a big John Carpenter fan, like loves John Carpenter. So you guys have that in common.
he has just it's I love the fact that he's such an economical director, and I mean that in the
Yeah.
sense that he can build a film on a small budget, but he also
Yeah.
is not is he doesn't believe in exposition dumps. So
Yep.
you'll get explanation throughout the movie, but it's not all in one chunk. He gets a little bit here and there, and he prefers a movie be under 90 minutes, which
Also
I
a
love
sweet
as well.
spot. Yep. Also very good. And you're kind of right. Like when you watch like Halloween, you get that famous like Doctor or Donald Pleasant's Dr. Loomis speech about Michael Myers, and that kind of explains who
Mhm,
he is in that first movie, and that's pretty much all you need,
mhm.
really, as far as like the less you know, the better.
You get it
Um,
in here. You get it in this film with which I'm sure, I know we'll talk about eventually, with like the priest reading the diary of his
yeah,
ancestor. Yeah, so like you get a
yeah,
little bit here and there,
yeah,
but
and
he's
that's the
he's
only
not.
run.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
you really have here. Yeah, I think I love that he is straight and to the point. I also love him as a personality. Back then and even today, I just love that he
He's an
gives
interesting guy.
he gives zero shits about like a lot of stuff.
He
Um,
made his last movie. It was a turd. He's like, I'm done. And now he just watches basketball games and plays video games.
yeah, yeah, and then like makes some good money as a executive producer on stuff. I mean, he was. I know when back when Jamie Lee Curtis pitched Halloween H2O, she asked him to be a part of it, and he was like, "Oh, thank you, but no, thank you." But by the
Mm,
time they got to like the 2018 Halloween, that trilogy with Blumhouse, he was on board as a producer, as was she, and they were getting. I know she talks about. I'm sure he's gotten paid more than her over time over the franchise, but they both talked about how like those three Halloween movies, they were getting like paid really well, not
oh yeah,
just as producers finally for having that idea. So I kind of like that he just kind of sits back and enjoys his money now, and
yeah.
you know
Yeah, he's like, I'm
uh,
good. Yeah.
yeah. And he but always been an interesting filmmaker though. So many like interesting ideas too. And I also love that he's honest about his movies too, because on the 4K, the special edition that I have for this, they talk about the making of it. When they get to the end, when they talk about, the overall reception of the movie, he is pretty honest about like things he could have done better, and
Mhm,
things he would have changed. And I know that there's certain scenes that he kind of amped up like a little bit of the violence and reshoots and stuff like that. And you know because it came out in a time like in 1980 when that horror movies were changing a bit, partly because of Halloween, but in a big way because of like stuff like Friday 13th and everything was
mhm.
coming out around that time. So they wanted like more, and he kind of felt like I think he kind of sometimes got pressured into doing that. Even though I do love that this is just a good old fashioned like ghost story, and there's not a lot of I love that it's not really heavy on like effects other than the fog effects and stuff. Like it's just
Mhm.
very simple, and I mean simple in the best way possible. The fact that it does so little and doesn't try to go too over the top is what I really enjoy about it, and it really does feel like a movie that is being told while you're sitting by a campfire,
Mhm.
and like as it starts, like some old man telling you some like old ghost story. That's how it kind of unfolds, and I like it for that. I mean, like the atmosphere, vibe, everything about the movie is just
Mhm.
done right to me. So I
But
guess when you're directing something like that, you're going to be picky about like what you can change and what you could have done
mhm.
differently. But I love the movie personally.
Well, that goes back to what I was saying about him being an economical director. Is he had no problem like just making a movie that was like 75 minutes long. But
Yeah,
yeah, the studios always said that like for it to be considered feature length, it should be at least 80 minutes.
yeah,
They prefer like 90 or above. That's why you get so many films nowadays that are 2.5 hours that don't need to be 2.5 hours.
yes,
But he did it with this film. The film was originally too short for the studio, so that scene of
yeah,
the old man telling the story was added in post.
right,
It was filmed on a studio because they didn't have the location anymore, and it was filmed in an afternoon. And it was just simply to add 5 minutes to the film so it would be considered a theatrical release.
yeah, yeah,
And then you were saying about how like horror films were changing at the time too. Like this was his original intent with this film was for it to be PG,
yeah,
and the studio wanted more of the violence that you were seeing in things like Friday the 13th and other movies like that.
right,
And so a lot of those scenes with the ghosts like stabbing people with the swords or the hooks or whatever was added for that effect.
yeah,
But you'll notice there's no blood.
yeah, exactly. It's just all kind of implied, and which is
Mhm.
still something that he does best. And but yeah, I mean, I get why they wanted him to maybe do that because 75-minute movie is short, but I would
Mhm.
be okay with it if I don't need a lot of meat on a movie. Like if it's
I,
lean, then like let it be lean, and
I
like
think this is why I love 80s films so much is because most of them are just a nice tight 90.
yeah, exactly. For those that don't know, I just said the film was directed by John Carpenter. He also co-wrote the screenplay and created the music for the film as well. He co-wrote it with his writing partner at the time, Deborah Hill. It stars Adrian Barbeau, Jamie Lee Curtis, Tom Atkins, Janet Leigh, Hal Holbrook, and it tells the story of a strange glowing fog that sweeps over a small coastal town in Northern California. When the film was released, it divided critics, receiving praise for its visuals and acting, and criticism for its structure and screenplay. But despite those mixed reviews, it went on to gross $21.3 million domestically on a $1.1 million budget, therefore making the film a success. It has gone on to establish itself as a cult classic. As we said, it also produced a remake in 2005. Which is the nicest thing I can say about it is Selma Blair is good in it. And
Yeah,
for what I
but it was
remember,
like a
for what I remember,
it was like a WB showcase though. It was like
oh, it was like
Maggie
Tom
Grace and
Welling,
Tom Welling.
Welling. Yeah, it was like this was back when all those people, because Maggie Grace, I think at the time was on Lost. I think she had done Lost
Mhm.
already, and she, sorry, spoiler for people who haven't seen that show. Her character got bumped off pretty early in season one, and then she transitioned into films, and this was one of them.
I think she was also
Uh,
in Taken around the same time as
yeah,
well. Yeah.
yeah. Tom Welling, we all know from like Smallville, and then Selma Blair was, she had been around since like the late '90s, courtesy like
Mhm.
Cruel Intentions and stuff like that. So it's a well produced. I'll say something nice about it. It's well produced. It looks good. Like it's shot well. But then when you watch, like, from what I remember, because it's been so long since I watched it, but I watching this movie for this, and I watch it every year. The fog effects look just as good in this movie that came out in 1980 compared to the remake that came out in 2005. And I know they put some extra juju on their fog effects in the remake, and
Mhm.
this one is like bare bones, like doing it as you should do it.
Yeah, it's a
They
smoke machine.
smoke machine and smoke machine, some lighting, and like I don't know, and it works just as well as like trying to
Even in
create it
like
on a
those
computer.
few scenes where the ghosts have like glowing red eyes adds a little bit to it, and it's all
Yeah.
practical. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you remember when you first saw the movie?
So my first experience with John Carpenter, like I don't consider myself. I didn't start considering myself a cinephile till like the '90s because that's when I started like getting caught up on the films from the '70s and '80s that I felt like I needed to know. And so my first experience with John Carpenter was They Live,
Okay.
which at the time I had only watched because Rowdy Piper was my favorite wrestler, and I
Yep.
really didn't have much knowledge of who John Carpenter was at the time. So then like I saw They Live, and then I saw Big Trouble in Little China, and I said,
Nice.
okay, these are some movies that I really like, and I saw who the director was and started looking into other things, and hadn't realized at that point that I had seen Halloween already, not knowing that that was a John Carpenter film, and so
Oh,
like
there you go.
I started gathering a little more knowledge of it. So this is one that I came to a lot later than when it came out. It was probably one of the last of his filmography that I watched. So like I watched the films out of order. It wasn't like I went straight through.
Yeah.
But I did, watch all of them at some point. This is one I came to a little bit later. It's not in my top 5, but it's definitely in my top 10 for John
Okay.
Carpenter films. I mean, there's some bottom of the barrel films that he's made over his career that
Ghost of Mars.
kind of like one and done for me. I actually kind of dig Ghost of Mars a little bit, even though it's not a great movie. It's one of my favorite facts about that film is he admitted that he kind of phoned it in a little bit because he was filming during March Madness and he really wanted to get to watch some of the games. So
Oh Jesus, that's
he would
funny.
like quick direct, get out of the
He
studios.
would.
Watch the
He
game.
would say that.
and it was supposed to be Escape from Mars. It was going to be the third Snake Plissken film.
Oh, okay. Nice.
But Kurt Russell didn't want to return for it, so
they repurposed it as.
and
what
so he
we got
repurposed it as Ghosts of Mars.
Oh, I saw The Fog not late. It was I guess later than like some of his other movies. It had nothing really to do with John Carpenter at first.
Mhm.
I mean, it was more of me and my other friends at the time wanting to see the other like movies, horror movies that Jamie Lee Curtis had been in, because everyone we
Okay,
saw
yeah.
Halloween and Halloween 2, and she, we knew that she was labeled like a scream queen, so we were like, oh, like what
Mhm.
are these other movies that she had done? And this is back when you could rent movies, so we actually rented the 3 that we hadn't seen,
Yeah.
which were
I know. I
Prom
remember
Night,
that conversation we had with Jackson teaching him what a
Yeah.
blockbuster was. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So we rented Terror Train, Prom Night, and
Mm.
The Fog, and we watched all 3 of them in a single night. And while I do have fun with those the other 2, Prom Night's fun and Terror Train's fun, this was the one I was like, oh, this is actually pretty good. Like they're like, this is not just some kind of schlocky like slasher movie. Like there is an attempt here to make a viable
Mhm.
film here.
And her character in this film is sort of strange. Like it almost feels.
Yes, it's something really off.
I mean, it almost feels shoehorned a little bit. Like let's get Jamie in here because her name will bring people into the film. But
Yeah.
with this rewatch that I did recently, having not watched it for a while, I tried to watch it a little more critically,
Yeah.
and I feel like her character did have some importance in the film now because she was the outsider who didn't know much about the town,
Yeah.
didn't know much about the fishing life and all that stuff. And so she was the audience surrogate and letting us know we're not the only ones who don't know what's going on yet.
Yeah. Even though it's fair to say that she feels shoehorned. I mean, I'm sure the character was written already in the screenplay, but I know that she had talked about it and said that, after Halloween, she thought that her film career was going to like really take off then.
Mhm.
And, because she got really good reviews for it. The movie was a hit, but then she was only getting like TV stuff after Halloween. And John Carpenter was like, well, I haven't really seen you in a movie since then. Like, I have this part. Do you want to do it? And he, that's how she got it.
Mhm.
And that's how she became part of the cast. Now it's funny because like, a lot of the key art and everything, she's all over it. I mean, I know there's different key arts for the movie, but there is an illusion that makes it seem like she's like the female lead, and she's not, of course.
The
That
female
goes
lead
to
is
Adrienne Barbeau.
Adrienne Barbeau, who was married to John Carpenter.
Yeah. And but I mean, I used to feel the same way as you did when I started watching the movie as I got older. I was like, it does kind of feel like they just kind of threw her in here just to be like, oh, like, yeah, it's Jamie Lee Curtis, and let's give her something to do. Also, the way she's thrown in it's funny to me now. I mean, at the time, the fact that she just kind of like she's hitchhiking and she meets this guy, and I think it's funny that Tom Atkins has kind of done this, and he did this in this where he gets immediately attached to a strange woman he doesn't really know because he did the same thing in Halloween 3 season of the witch. Like
they don't say their age. They don't say their ages in the film.
Yeah.
For any, but and just so you know, in reality, at this time, Tom Atkins was 45 and Jamie Lee Curtis was 22.
Yep, big difference.
A little bit of a difference there.
And I don't know how you feel. I know this is not really a part about the movie, but does she give off the vibe that she is incredibly younger than him, or like, do you think like their scenes together they are pretty kind of in sync with each other? Because I think they have like decent.
They had pretty good chemistry. I think
with each other.
She had a face that look. I mean, she looked young, but he.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't realize he was that old either. Like I thought he was a little younger than that, at least like maybe in his 30s. So it didn't seem too weird to me. I mean, the first time I saw it, I didn't think anything of it. This time around, I'm like curious. I was more curious about it, so I just kind of was looking up, IMDb info and stuff. So, but yeah, no, I thought this time around, like there was some more importance to the character. Yeah, I did something similar. I did something similar with Adrienne Barbeau that you did with Jamie Lee Curtis. Was I saw my first experience with Adrienne Barbeau is when I watched Escape from New York for the first time.
Okay.
And I was like, damn, look at this woman.
Yeah. So my first experience with Adrienne Barbeau was actually with her voice and not her, physically. She's the voice of Selena Kyle Catwoman on the Batman animated series. So once I found that out later, because I grew up watching that as a kid, and I was like, oh, she's the voice of her, and it's great that like I did know her voice from that because like her voice has to be so distinct for this too, since she's playing a DJ and she plays the role really well. I always felt bad for her. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't bad for her at all because she was married to John Carpenter. I'm sure she was happy to be a part of the movie, but she's so detached from everyone else because she has to be up in that lighthouse for like the majority of the movie. I think she only has one real scene in person with like probably her son, right? And
I wrote this. I wrote this in my notes for the film. If you need another DJ, maybe diversify your broadcast and play something more than smooth jazz.
I know.
Which honestly was the reason they used that music was because it was the only thing that Carpenter could afford the rights for.
Yeah, and
at the time.
Because I would have ballooned his $1.1 million budget if he was
and at one point she says, "Here's one from the old Coupe de Villes."
Villes, yeah.
And Coupe de Villes was John Carpenter's actual band.
Yeah.
So one way to get around it, you play your own music too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I had seen her in Escape from New York, and then I had watched. She was in Creep Show and Swamp Thing.
Right.
And Swamp Thing is a really really good campy DC film from the 80s.
And I found that out later. Then I kind of had to like do like a deep dive into her later in life after I like watched this a few times. I was like, oh, is she in? And then she's such a big fan favorite amongst like genre fans that she's done so many different things like this. And yeah, such solid. She actually every time I watch it gets better and better in the movie too. Like I mean, it has to be hard to you're pretty much alone and you're acting out. I mean, like she doesn't really have anyone to play off of. Like all the stuff that she does later in the movie, like calling out to like over the radio for someone to get her son, and then trying to reach the sheriff. All that stuff could have been easily not as good in the wrong hands, and she handles that all very well. So she does. I think she
does a really good job of like changing her voice too, because she'll do the DJ voice, which is like the sultry, slow. Plus it's an overnight thing, so she has that. And then when you hear her talk normal, it's just a completely different voice. The only other character she really interacts with is the weather station guy, who
Charles
calls and flirts with her all the time. But you have to know that when they were filming that, she probably wasn't actually on the phone with the guy. It was just all one-way conversation.
Could have been like either like John Carpenter feeding her lines or like someone like she's not talking to him at all. So that was always my thing when I watched it. I was like, oh, she's so detached from everyone else because it's such a good ensemble as a whole too. I mean, like a lot of people don't have like a lot to do, but like I love the all the characters feel very lived in and they feel like they're from that place, and like it feels like they bring like a history of that place with them, And that's another thing I like about it is like all
Yeah.
those characters just feel because they're well written enough where, and I guess performed well enough that it makes you feel like you're actually watching real residents of this like small town.
Like you can
They did
feel
a
like
good job of
like
picking everyone.
all the characters feel like they belong there. It doesn't feel like actors playing characters from this town.
Yeah,
Like they feel like
exactly.
realistic characters. It's not like the other Fog version where they're actors playing characters from this town.
Just right, exactly. And I wonder if it was like at all hard. I mean, probably they didn't want to draw attention to it, but you have Janet Leigh and Jamie Lee Curtis in the same movie together.
Mhm.
They are in like the climax together at the end of the church. Like they don't really like interact really, but like I wonder if that was the like, oh, should we have them interact or should we not draw attention to it? I think it's nice that they don't. I actually like that they have Nancy Loomis, who I guess is now Nancy Keys and now currently, but she was Annie in the original Halloween. That they have her interacting with her, as her assistant, and they have some funny stuff together. Like her Jan Lee's character says some like off, like just like basically insinuates that she's annoying, but she's right when she's like she's suggesting stuff. Like she's not like outwardly rude to her, but it's like it's just the interactions they have together are really good. And her,
It's like she seems more like just tired of it all than anything else.
yeah, like her sister just was like, yeah, it's like the way she answers stuff is just very like slow and like and deliberate. But then there's also moments where you feel like she really cares, like when she finds out what happened to her husband on the ship, and
The husband,
she
yeah.
and she still wants to do like the ceremony, and she doesn't want to go home, and then finally, of course, before it's too late, she's like, let me take you home. Like, so you see, like they like care about each other, like they just have this really like interesting kind of work dynamic.
Only 2 films they did with each other in their careers.
Yeah,
And
and then that small part
H2O.
yeah, and it is interesting that they don't have them interact. I mean, maybe it's for the best. Maybe it would have been distracting to have her and Jamie Lee, engage with each other on some level. But it is cool that they got to be in 2 things together, and even something as substantial as this too. I think they did some TV stuff together. I don't know if that's for sure or not, but
I don't know. I know as far as feature films went, like it was just these 2, and it was a John Carpenter film and a John Carpenter adjacent film.
It's a film, yeah. And honestly, I enjoyed her character as well. She's kind of brings a little bit of comic relief. I don't know if it's like totally intentional, but it's just the way she handles herself.
She does a good job playing that character who's like self-important because she's a big deal in a small town.
Yeah, exactly, definitely. And then Father Malone, Hal Holbrook, does a very good job of. He's a convincing kind of like. I want to call him crazy. I think I just love by the end of it. He's just like I think drunk, right?
He's, like, he's an alcoholic priest, yeah,
and an alcoholic, and then like.
So did you know that was John Carpenter making a cameo in the opening first scene?
Oh,
you see
yeah.
Holbrook?
In the
He
beginning,
plays the janitor.
He wants to be paid, right? And,
yeah. Carpenter said afterwards he was so embarrassed by his own performance that he didn't put himself in any of his other movies.
I mean, directors always question themselves. I know Wes Craven had things to say about when he did his stuff with Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Like, even though it was perfectly fine, it's hard when you're either playing yourself or making having a director's cameo in a movie when you don't normally act. But everyone kind of wants to have their like, oh, I'm going to be like Hitchcock and like put myself in a cameo, just because.
The biggest criminal in that respect is Shyamalan.
Yeah, and like Shyamalan, and and he takes those like Hitchcock comparisons and runs with them, because I know that when the reviews for like the Sixth Sense and stuff were coming out and Unbreakable, they were like, oh, he's kind of like adjacent to him, and then he just kind of ran with that and kept doing it, and then we realized that he wasn't the next Hitchcock, not by a long shot, but yeah, not even a little bit. But yeah, Hal Holbrook is great in the movie though. I like his performance too, and like you actually can feel the what's the right word for it? Like as he's learning all this stuff, I guess, as we're learning it with him, how bad he feels about them celebrating this town and then knowing what they did in the past, and what his ancestors did in the past and all that. The scene where he has, you brought it up though, the scene where he is reading from the journal or whatever to them. I love that is the biggest exposition dump of like, what do we need? Like, why is this happening? What's going on? And most movies would just hit you over the head with like multiple like scenes of like why this is happening. And I'm glad that you only really get one, and it's really well acted. and
Well, you get it
well
like
written.
you get it in spurts because he'll read a
Yeah.
little bit to her, and then they'll cut
Oh,
to
to Tom
other
Hanks and like
characters
Jamie.
doing
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
and then come back to him. Whereas some films would just have him sit there and read the book to the audience, and it's
Oh,
like
yeah, right.
a lot of people would check out halfway through. So this way, you're getting the information sort of as Janet Leigh's character is getting the information just in little dribs and drabs, and I think that's more effective.
Yeah, because that scene is kind of cutting back and forth to Tom Atkins and Jamie Lee Curtis being on
Mhm.
like the ship, and then knowing that something's wrong, and he's telling her that story. It's interesting too because that story that he tells, that's well written and well acted too. Because I know it doesn't really have like anything to really do with the current story that we in. He's just telling her a story about like when he had a bad feeling before or something, and like,
Mhm.
but it is nicely juxtaposed with like what Father Malone is telling in the other scenes as they're cutting back and forth to each other. So, and also it helps with the score in that scene is also excellent. It really helps drive those whole two scenes together.
I think too. Like I think it's also is it cut with the scene where they go to the coroner's office to see the one sailor.
But
I don't
no,
know if that's
no,
one that's cut with the story. I don't remember, but that's
no, yeah, it comes a little bit later because that happens after. So there's a scene going back and forth when they're on the boat, and then there's that one false scare with Jamie Lee Curtis, and she says she thinks she's gonna go now, or whatever. And then the guy falls out on her, and he's dead. And she gets to get
that
her
was
signature cream.
that was another scene that was added in later
Edit.
because time padding and more scares.
Yep.
Because it's really never explained why this guy comes back to life briefly.
No, yeah, you're right.
And then carves the 6 in the floor, or the 3 or whatever it was he carves into the floor, which I still don't know how he had enough time to do that, but
Yep, because he only just kind of fell. Like it didn't really
he just
do
kind of
anything
fell, and
else.
then there was a number carved on the floor. But that was kind of a scene that wasn't really supposed to be there. It was more like just let's add a little bit more to it.
Yeah.
I like the scene. So there's certain things that make me laugh in this, and I'm like, it's always like I know it's like a dramatic timing thing usually, but it's Janet Leigh and the assistant go into the church looking for Father Malone, Al Ulbricht's character, and they don't see him, and she's just walking, and she's like, Father Malone, and she walks to a certain area of the church where it's like pitch dark, and he just comes out of nowhere and grabs her on the shoulder, and it's like cheap jump scare, but I'm like, you didn't hear her calling your name the whole time. You're in a church that's
exactly
echoing, and it's like, no, it was just you needed that jump scare, didn't you, Father?
Yeah, exactly. Because that's so unnecessary too. And yeah, I actually like that movie too.
That made me laugh.
I actually like the way the movie starts as a whole, like kind of just like also setting up like there's something mysterious going on without having to give a bunch of exposition. Like just add like opening with like this is this event is starting right now, and just having all these various scenes. Like the opening feels long. I guess it is long, but like it takes up a good chunk of the movie. That I didn't realize how long it takes for the movie to actually like fully open to get into like the main part of the story, because we're just going from like different parts of the town as this like event. Of course, is like messing with like car alarms, and the dogs are barking, and like all this other stuff is like really just messing with the entire town.
I said it's setting the atmosphere up physically and like literally and figuratively, because the atmosphere is it's creepy, it's it's spooky, all that stuff. But then you're also getting the physical setup too. Like here's the fog rolling in, here's how it's affecting everything. And then even like the scenes that are cool where like the weatherman guy is like, oh, the fog's coming in from the east. And she's like, no, I saw it come in from the west. And then you realize it's kind of everywhere,
Yeah.
So it's I like it. And the reveal of the ghosts when they first appear on the ship.
Oh,
is an awesome reveal. It's a really, really cool reveal.
I also laughed too, because I never realized. I mean, I know I probably should have realized I've seen the movie so much, but it was when watching it for this. It's after she reports that there's like a fog bank it's coming in, and this was before it attacks the ship.
Mhm.
And they're having this conversation about Stevie Wayne, and then like how she sounds, that she's hot, and the guy's just looking out the window. He's like, "There ain't no fog big out there," and then like, and then he says it again, and then he's like, "Wait, that's a fog big out there."
Yeah,
it's just like
is
so funny.
That's another one of John Carpenter's favorite muses. That's Buck Flower.
Okay, nice.
The actor who says that, "Fuck out there," he's in They Live. He's also in They Live. He's the homeless guy who becomes a sellout later on, and has, when he sees Roddy Piper, he's wearing a tuxedo, and he's like, "Oh, glad to see you boys are coming over to the winning side." That's Buck Flower.
Oh, I should know he sounds like that still. Yeah, yeah. I just love that line delivery because he is not.
Ain't no fuck out there.
Yeah. It's not invested in their conversation at all about Stevie Wayne whatsoever. But yeah, they're revealing that shit. It's pretty good, and I love that. I mean, like, I know, like, I think that was kind of juiced up a bit too, but you still don't see anything really. It's just mostly like them reacting, and then the occasional like sound and all that, and it's mostly just like kind of stingers from like the music that make that scene pretty good. I had a friend when he first watched the movie with me, he was like, "Oh, the movie's just so dark, I can't see what's going on at certain times." And I was like, "That's the point. I mean, it's not supposed to be well
compared to some movies lately, like it's a pretty well lit film."
Yeah. I was like, it's not like that bad.
No, I mean, there's some movies I've watched lately, like recently, newer films, where I'm like, I don't know if I'm just getting older and my eyesight's going, or if this is really just poorly lit. Yeah. And The Fog is not a poorly lit film. It's just it's the atmosphere it works for it. And I didn't think it was like a film that was so dark I couldn't see anything.
No, I couldn't either. I mean, he complained about it. I was like, really? He's like, no, I mean,
except the scene where Hal Holbrook is hiding in the shadows. But other than that,
yeah, because he just materializes. Well, kudos to Dean Cundey, because he shot this movie. Like, he shot a bunch of John Carpenter's movies, and shot a lot of big movies. But this is a really good looking movie for how cheap it was. I know, like, the original budget was $900,000, and then it went up to $1.1 million with the reshoots. But it looks. That's why we've been talking about this all during Tales of Horror and like different movies we talked about, how horror movies, with their limited budget, they make sure that if they're done well, that every cent is on the screen. And that's what it seems like they did here. It's like one of the better looking John Carpenter movies, and it's not even that expensive. So, and that has a lot to do with, like you said, him being economical, how he shoots things and where he shoots it, the locations they pick for this.
You can look at like a lot of those early horror films, like the first in each of the series, like Nightmare on Elm Street and this film and Friday the 13th, Halloween. They're all independent films in a way, because the budgets are so small, and these directors figured out ways to make it work, and they're now considered classics because of this.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen this Carpenter's first film, Dark Star?
No, I have not. I heard.
Oh my God! So Dark Star is his very first film he ever did. It was actually like a student film, but then he turned it into a feature. It did poorly at the box office, but it was like, a new film at the time. But it was filmed. It came out right around the time Star Wars came out, so it was also kind of like overshadowed by that, because it is a sci-fi in space story. But the budget was so low on that he did a lot of the interior work himself. And so there's a scene where the characters are walking through a hallway, and the hallway looks like metal girders, but it was old egg cartons that he hand painted himself brown and hung up on the wall to make it look like metal. So I mean, like, he's somebody who's known how to stretch a dollar when necessary throughout his whole career.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of the directors can teach so many people now, and studios now, how to do that, because everything is just way too expensive for its own good now.
Something to be said for like practical effects.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, we were talking about doing a episode on our show in the future called "Big Budget Films with Terrible CGI." you can name like how many films are ruined by it because that they don't want to use the practical effects that work so well.
Yeah, and Carpenter used. I mean, The Thing is like what considered almost the granddaddy of some of those things. It's really good practical effects.
It's beautiful. It's one of the greatest practical effect films ever made. Yeah. They did it with the what's that the remake or / prequel, whatever the hell it was, the one with Mary Elizabeth Winstead.
Oh yeah.
Thing.
Yeah.
They had originally filmed it with all practical effects to make it look congruent with the original film.
Yeah.
And the studio was not happy with it. They made them go back and redo all the scenes with CGI. Jesus. And it increased the budget substantially, and looks worse than the practical effects.
Yep, and which made that movie not at least theatrically profitable because they didn't make a lot of money
No.
when it came out. I know
you had said you filmed that film to look exactly like John Carpenter original. I think people would have went to see it.
Yep, because actually the movie isn't. From what I remember, I actually haven't seen it since theaters. I do remember it feeling like it was an okay movie. Like it wasn't horrible by any means.
Plot wise, it was okay, and Mary Elizabeth Winstead was really good in it. But
good, yeah.
The CGI killed it for me because I'm like, this is, it's you're shitting on the charm that was the original film.
Yeah. Exactly. No,
Yeah.
that's true. And it goes to show you, like, I don't know how many more times you need examples of this way was better. Or maybe there should be a happy marriage of both. I don't know, but
You can have a happy marriage of both. All you got to watch is Jurassic Park, and you can see the perfect marriage between both.
Yeah, there you go. You're right. That is the perfect marriage.
The perfect marriage between both.
Yeah.
But getting back to this film.
No, it's a beautiful looking movie. I mean, that's what I loved when I finally got it on 4K because I was like, oh, some of the shots look so good, and some of the shots of the fog rolling in look so like menacing. I know it's just like
yeah, it is like it is pretty beautiful cinematography. The scene where the kid is running on the beach by himself, and when he finds the plaque that says Dane on it or whatever, like that's a beautifully filmed scene. The lighthouse is really cool. Actually, the scariest part of the film for me was watching how many steps Adrienne Barbeau had to walk down to get to that lighthouse.
Oh, yo, jeez, I know. I was like, Jesus, that's her work trek every day.
I saw it in like the IMDb trivia somewhere or something. It was like 300 and something steps. Like it was an insane amount of steps he had to walk down to get to that lighthouse.
He's like, man, she's like, I'm your wife. What the hell? What are we doing here? But yeah, you're right. It is that scene is really shot, and I know it's the scene where a lot of stuff begins to happen. But as it's rolling in, where Andy is it Mrs. Kobritz is that lady that's watching him? That scene is just really well done too, because it's a combination of like how beautiful but menacing it all looks, and then also the music kind of escalating as it's getting closer and closing in.
You have to say something for the ghost, though. They're very polite. They always knock before they enter.
Knock. They always like, and they're in the slow knock too. The slow knocks, and I felt bad for Mrs. Cobra. So I was like, innocent.
Yeah, she was the one character really didn't deserve it.
Nothing wrong. She's just babysitting.
She was just another number on the ghost hit list because they needed. What was it? They needed 6 people or something.
6 people like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like
just
there was 3 on the boat.
If Andy would have opened the door first, it would have been him.
It would have been him.
It
was like, and honestly, he probably deserved it after waking his mom up after getting done a 4 a.m. shift, like waking her up early in the morning.
I know exactly, and I'm thankful he turned around when he did because he didn't have to see poor stores get snatched. And also too, I'm glad that they showed restraint there too. Like you don't have to see your guy. It all happens in like. In the fog, so you don't have to see anything. We all know what would happen to her. I mean, I know some people would have been loved to have seen them like hook her or whatever they did to her to get rid of her. But
I mean, that's what the studio wanted. But
yeah. But yeah, that scene is so well done. And I just like her desperation on over the radio is so visceral and compelling, and like you buy that she. And you know what? I know eventually, like we go beyond the movie, and like she eventually finds out that her son's okay, but like it ends with like she doesn't know what happens to her kid by the end of it. Like
she's on the
it's hoping for the
roof of the lighthouse fighting off the ghosts, and
the
kids at the church with everybody else fighting off their ghosts and
their ghosts. I thought about that today. I was like, oh yeah, she would really find out if her son lived or died or what happened to him. I mean, I know she will, but.
Yeah,
probably like
the film ends rather abruptly with the beheading of Hal Holbrook.
No, yeah.
Because again, the ghosts have a flair for dramatic timing. You think they disappeared, and all of a sudden they come back to kill him.
They have a flair for the complete dramatic. I love when they're breaking into the church and like they're like slowly putting their hands to the glass. It doesn't like shatter. It's just like a slow. Everything is very like rehearsed and precise.
They're not. They don't run after anybody. It's all very slow moving.
They occasionally get aggressive. They grab Sandy, the assistant's hair when she's standing by the window.
I think they do get the kid at one point too. At the end, like they're I think Tom Atkins' character is trying to fight them off to get the kid and all that.
Yeah.
And so it is. There's that tension that they build in that last scene, but overall, it's a pretty tame movie.
It's very tame. So one of my friends, Sean, he we watched this together like a while ago, and he was saying like, oh, like it starts to escalate and get really good, like beginning with like actually probably beginning when the weather dude dies, when she you know, realizes that it's coming after him, and then she has to warn the rest of the town, and like so from there he was like, oh, we're getting good. Then we get to the church, and then he did say that it does kind of just like like at the end there. And I was like, I guess it does, but like that's the story it's telling. Like you know, we're it's supposed to believe like they get what they want, and then
they gave him the cross that was made of gold, and you know, you think the ghosts are satisfied at this point. They disappear, but you gotta have that last little jump scare with the one ghost showing up to kill the father Malone.
So was that in the script already, or did they add that?
Yes.
Because that feels like something it was. Okay.
I think that was all part of the original script. As far as I could tell, the only things that were added was the little bit of like violence that you see, the old man telling the story at the beginning, and the you know, the scene with like the zombie like that doesn't really fit in with the rest of the film. So
oh yeah,
the guy attacking Jamie Lee Curtis in the coroner's office.
In the coroner's office, yeah.
That was all added in.
Because it did like that. I mean, that's cool that that was in there originally. Because at first I was like, that's a little like button at the end, so it feels like something that a studio would be like, okay, we need a little like, you know, our Carrie moment or something at the end. You're like, oh, it's not quite over. And I guess like because when I remember when I watched it one of the first few times, I was like, all right, they got what they wanted, but they're like, no, we're still pissed. Like, we need
well, he was the descendant of the guy that screwed him over. So I think it was like more like, oh well, you know what, we probably should kill you.
Yeah. even though he gave them what they wanted, he knew what they wanted, he knew what they were coming for. Like, he actually did the right thing.
Hey, you know, but I'm pretty sure that was part of the original script. The second scariest thing in this film is when Jamie Lee Curtis and Tom Atkins are on the ship investigating, and Tom Atkins decides to drink out of a beer can that was just sitting there.
Just sitting there. Oh, yeah. Because I hate warm
That's
beer.
An 80s trope.
Yeah, I hate warm beer, and I don't care how cold that fog might have made that shit for. Oh, I guess it was. You're like, they always say how cold it was when when it rolls through.
I wasn't even thinking of that. I was like, this is just a random can of beer that was sitting on the ship. From,
well, I mean, I guess I was like, oh, they're buddies. They probably all done that before, but it's gross. I was like, gross. I forgot about it. It's disgusting.
And this is the guy that Jamie Lee Curtis was into because you know he's weird like her.
Yeah, she's like,
and drinks and drives.
Are you weird? Drinks and drives, and like, oh, so many things in the 80s that you just get away with, and that is one of them.
It's a very 80s thing.
I like when he questions when he picks her up because she says like this is her first time hitchhiking, and then through the conversation you can tell it's not. And he was like, oh, like I thought this was your first time, and then she was like, then she implies that it isn't, and they're just all cool with like, you know, they were cool with a lot of strange stuff, and like this is the one like trope from this time period, like 70s, 80s. Like Jackson and I covered The Hitcher last week.
Okay.
Actually, that actually releases this week as of this recording, and I was like, that's the one thing I could never fully understand because I didn't grow up in a time where that would be a viable option for me. I'm like, no, I'm not gonna like walk on the side of the road and like try to hop in someone's car to get a ride. But I guess like back then it was such a typical thing to do.
I'm not gonna say it's normal, but it was something that wasn't something unheard of, you know.
Right. So that was always one like little horror movie trouble. Like, yep, no, there's no way I'm hopping into someone's car I don't know and like hoping.
Especially if you watch The Hitcher.
Yeah, especially if you watch that. Now,
and this is the one. This is the one with Rutger Hauer, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, the one with Rutger Hauer, not the remake. We did talk briefly about the remake because he didn't know they remade it, and I was like, oh well, Sean Bean's in it. He's like, oh, that's good. Well, that's the only good.
That's
thing.
about the only good thing about it.
And Sophia Bush looks great, and it's not that she's bad. It's just I just think switching the gender roles in that was not necessary. I mean, I think that's
the
what
problem
makes
is like the problem I have with remakes in general is there are some that work because you stick to the original story and you don't try to change it too much, and you're just like doing it like something like True Grit was a really good remake of the John Wayne one. But if you're not going to do that, then you should do something that's completely different. So like Ocean's 11 is an amazing remake, and I think is actually better than the original Ocean's 11 with Frank Sinatra. But then you have things like The Fog, where the studios decide to try to reinvent the wheel, and you had the material right there. You could have just used that. But they had to add things to it. You always have to add more story for the other characters, and it's not necessary. And
Yeah.
I mean, all you have to do is look at the runtime. John Carpenter's Fog was an hour and 29 minutes. The remake was an hour and 41.
Yeah.
So,
And and we were talking about like the him being good at like the minimal exposition dump. Like the remake, there's all this backstory now. I remember Maggie Grace. From what I remember, like there's a whole thing with her and that connection to the ghosts and all that stuff too. And there's also I do remember a really cheesy image towards the end of it where I don't know if she becomes a ghost or what happens at the end. I forgot because I haven't watched it in a long time, but it was something along those lines. And I just remember being like, the best thing about that movie is its poster. That's the best thing. I remember the poster that was
it's a cool poster. It's like the
pretty cool.
skull,
The mouth
like
and the mouth thing.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, it's a
really
good poster,
cool.
but it's like it's almost as bad as Mark Wahlberg seeing the Abraham Lincoln statue with the ape's head on it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that, and then it becomes an issue of like, okay, now we're throwing in too much. Like the thing that works about this movie is that it's so simple and it doesn't really need all that. It's hard to like add all that stuff without it being cheesy. That's the one thing I remember about the remake is that they added so much like weird like plot exposition that it was cheesy and then it wasn't well written. And I don't want to blame the actors entirely because I've seen all of them be good in other things. I just think it was the script.
I always blame the studios.
Yeah. And of course, this was 2005. So this is when like every horror movie from the 80s or 70s was getting remade. I mean, that all kind of started with Texas Chainsaw and then kind of, then.
I don't know if we talked about this last time I was on. We did Hellraiser, but the Hellraiser remake suffers the same problem. Like I thought the creature designs were amazing.
Yeah.
The costumes were great. The some of the special effects were good and all that, but it was a 2.5 hour movie.
Yeah.
It was a remake of a film that was an hour and 30 minutes, give or take.
Yeah.
Because they gave all this backstory for the main characters. That just wasn't necessary. Like, I don't care about your backstory. I just want to see the Cenobites.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's funny you say that too, because like we talked about that with Hellraiser, how like the Cenobites are like barely in Hellraiser. I mean, I think I forgot if anyone said it or if I just thought growing up is realizing that Julia is the real villain of like those first two movies. And
I think it was the guy from that Tales from the Crypt podcast that was on.
Yeah.
That said something about that.
Yeah, growing up is realizing that that she's the real villain of those first two movies, and especially in that second one because they do and I don't think it's a detriment at all. They add just a little backstory to like one of them mainly to show that they were people before this, and and that was just enough. We don't need like a whole like thread about who they were.
that franchise fell apart with the third film because that's when the studio took it over from Clive Barker and turned Pinhead into the villain, and he's not the villain.
Exactly.
He's the guy that punished the villain.
They want to make him the Freddy Krueger of that franchise, and everyone wanted their Freddy Krueger. What are you surprised that or what was it? I guess it's kind of hard to say because you said you saw like when you saw Halloween, you really know it was directed by John Carpenter. But like watching them now, does it feel like Halloween to this is kind of like a natural progression for him? Like, are you surprised that he went and did like a ghost story instead of doing like like kind of a knife picture as like some of the people in that movie called Halloween?
I think John Carpenter always just did what he wanted to do.
Yeah, that's true actually.
And he's just a guy that marched to the beat of his own drum. And you look at like his run from Halloween through the 80s is a pretty amazing run. Like most of those movies, I would say are classics.
Yeah.
When you get into the 90s, things start to taper off a little bit because you get things like Memoirs of the Invisible Man and Ghost of Mars in the 2000s and
Village of the Damned and
Village of the Damned, and they start to like fall off a little bit. But from his first film Dark Star, which was 77, to Halloween in 78, all the way through, it's an amazing run, and he doesn't get the credit he deserves sometimes. His only film to get any sort of award consideration was Starman, and that was for Jeff Bridges for Best Actor. But that was it. Like, you know, he's always been kind of shunned by the awards. A lot of people have like cribbed his style, but he doesn't get credit for it. You know, and he's somebody who was, like I said, economical. Like he knew how to stretch a budget, which you would think would make him a
director.
go-to. Yeah. But you know, he often had to fight for the things he wanted a lot.
And they're like, make this 1.1 million work for us, man. Like, all right, well,
I think a lot of the films that didn't work for him were the ones where he actually had a budget.
Yeah,
like
we have more money to work
Escape
with.
from LA, you know, like which overall I don't think is a bad film, but
yeah,
there are elements of it that are over the top.
Yeah, very
same
much
thing
so.
happened with Ghost of Mars. He had the budget, but I don't think he had the drive at that point.
Yeah, I think he was done. I mean, I don't know what the climate was like, but after Halloween to this, if there was like any pressure on him to, because that was so successful, and I know like in the beginning, like Halloween didn't get great reviews at first. It was a slow build. Like they said, like when that movie first opened, they were like, "Oh, I don't think it's doing great," and they were ready to move on to the next thing. And then it gradually caught on, and it became what it was. So like we look at directors today that have that one movie that they start with, and I know he did some before Halloween, but that one movie that really breaks them out, and then when it comes to doing their next one, it's like, okay, like can it live up to that? I mean, we talked about Shyamalan earlier, and that happened with him, I think, with From Sixth Sense to Unbreakable, and I actually think that is a good twosome of movies, even though Unbreakable is very different.
Yeah, I think he got it too much in his head that he had to have a twist in every movie,
right?
And I think that was a detriment to him. Like it didn't have to be that way, but it kind of became his thing, and like I think he was pressured by that. Carpenter, on the other hand, was he's a movie fan's director. Like if you love movies, you know, you probably like John Carpenter. Exactly. But he wasn't a critical darling.
Right.
Like Halloween was the exception, but you know, The Fog didn't receive great reviews. The Thing got shit on
once until way later, they were like, "Oh, we were wrong about this one."
I think it's gained more popularity in the last 20 years than any other time that it's been around, and it's reached a point now where I don't even call it a cult favorite anymore now because I think it's just a mainstream horror favorite. But back in 82, 83 when it came out, it did very poorly, and you know he had a hard time, I think, getting support from the studios after that.
Yeah, he was supposed to do Firestarter. I know that was you know, and when The Thing didn't do well, they took that from him. So I feel like he's always kind of been like, and I'm glad you said that about him being very economical and working with money well and knowing how to like really work a budget, because that is a great thing about him as a filmmaker. But I feel like he really did get beat up on a lot industry wise, as far as, you know, not getting the credit, like you said, that he deserved for a really long time. And I don't know if that made him bitter at all. I mean, he has a funny personality. I think the guy's
he always seemed like he was a little bitter at times too. But like, it's like he had all the success with Halloween, and then they said, let's give him another studio option to see how well he does with it, because then he did Assault on Precinct 13, and that's a pretty solid film. So I think like he had a little bit of leeway when it came to filming his next movie, which was The Fog.
Yeah.
So I think like he kind of just had, you know, he had a little bit, you know, but then after that didn't do well and The Thing bombed, it was like, all right, he's lost the juice.
And then in between that, I mean, like after The Fog, they want to do Halloween 2. He's like, well, I'm not directing it. So he writes it. And then he doesn't even want to write it because he was like, it wasn't even supposed to have a sequel. So that's why, you know, he has that story that he always tells that, like, you know, basically it was a lot of beer that led to, you know, the whole Laurie Strode being Michael Myers' sister. Like,
sister,
you know,
because that wasn't the case in the first film.
And I think that's why I've always felt like, to use the word bitter again, I thought that he was always a little bitter against Halloween and what it became, because, and I talked about that a little bit with Wes Craven, but I don't think Wes Craven came off as outwardly bitter. He might have had his own feelings about what A Nightmare on Elm Street became after that first movie, because I know him and Robert Shea kind of had a little bit of a falling out after the first one, because Robert Shea was like, hey, this is a big thing, I want to keep it going, and he was like, well, I didn't have the intention to. I know he came and did story stuff on Nightmare 3, and then of course, like, kind of took ownership of it, at least to put it to bed on his terms with New Nightmare. But
I think like
he's always come off different to me than Carpenter because he never felt as bitter about that, his big movie success compared to how Carpenter maybe felt about Halloween and how it shaped the rest of his career.
I think the difference is to the Nightmare series, even though Craven walked away from it, it retained the same spirit throughout.
Yeah.
Like Freddy Krueger never really changed. The story never really changed much. It followed the same, tropes as the original film. But with like the Halloween series, I feel like it changed a lot over the course of all the movies that came out. I mean, first off, we got the third one, which wasn't even a Michael Myers film, which totally.
And I think that made him bitter too because he was like, I don't want to make another one with him. I want to write his own thing. And like we talked about on our episode that we did, that it was ahead of its time in that sense. That it was like, oh, we're going to turn this into an anthology. But I think even like one of the producers, like Urban LeBlanc, he's on like one of the Blu-ray special editions when they pitched him the idea for Halloween 3. He just like blunt. He's like, I think it's a stupid idea. And he just kind of, I think like,
a lot of people were angry about it at the time, fans included, because they were expecting another Myers thing. But it was, I mean, Season of the Witch by itself isn't all that bad a film.
Yeah.
So I mean, but then they bring him back in the fourth one. I don't know how much Carpenter was involved in that. It might have just been like story credit. But you look at his filmography, and there's a lot of story credits just because it's his franchise that's being used. It's
right,
not,
exactly.
The same thing with The Fog, the remake of The Fog. He's on there. I think it's like a producer or something like that.
Yeah, and I think he said some pretty awful things about it.
Yeah, like in the interview, they asked him like how much he was involved, and he goes, "Well, my name's on it because I wrote the original one." He goes, "But as far as involvement, I pretty much walked in the room, said, 'Hey, everybody,' picked up my check and left."
Yeah, and I could totally see him doing that too.
Yeah, man. He went home and he played Call of Duty for a little bit.
Yep. Really, he's all of us.
He's the normal guy. Yeah,
he really is all of us. So when The Fog was released, it was a minor hit. Like I said, it made $21.3 million on a $1.1 million budget. It says its theatrical run was a total of 152 weeks, so I guess it makes sense back then.
That's normal.
A long time.
They would stay in the theaters for a long time, because you would have to wait for it to go to video. So it wasn't like now where a movie's in the theater for 45 days and now it's on streaming.
Yeah, exactly.
And then people are talking about why aren't people going to the movie theater? It's because you're giving them the movie in 45 days. Why would they have to go to the theater?
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. And then the movie, like we said, got mixed reviews at first. The New York Daily News gave the film 2 out of 4 stars, praised the performances, but wrote that Carpenter obviously is entranced by his ghost stories, but he seems willing to sacrifice story for effect. Los Angeles Times again applauded the acting and commented the film as an elegant and scary thriller of the supernatural that's far more impressive and satisfying than Carpenter's grisly and pointless but profitable Halloween. I did not know the Los Angeles Times did not like Halloween. Almost every critic praised the visual elements of the movie, but Roger Ebert gave it 2 out of 4 stars. Said the movie is made with style and energy, but it needs a better villain. This isn't a great movie, but it does show great promise from Carpenter. And then Leonard Maltin gave it 2.5 out of 4 stars and called it a well-directed but obvious ghost story.
Really an obvious one?
In the years, yeah, exactly. In the years since it came out, it has a big cult following, has been reevaluated by many critics. Carpenter has come around on saying he believes it's a minor horror classic now, although he also said that it was not his favorite film due to the reshoots and low production values. Which is why he ended up wanting to do the remake, because he thought he could maybe do, or at least let them do the remake, because he thought bigger production values could improve it. That ended up not being the case. But currently has a 75% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes because a lot of these review reassessments online. Time Out conducted a poll of over 1,000 authors, directors, and actors and critics who have worked within the horror genre, and they to vote for their top horror films. And The Fog placed number 77 on their top 100 list. The Guardian called it one of the director's most atmospheric. The shots of Wave Lash Cove and Fog Choked Headland, making the town's impending reckoning almost poetic. And Zombie Media, 80 Movies to Die For author Arnold T. Blumberg wrote the film was a very effective small-scale chiller and an attempt to capture the essence of a typical spooky American folktale while simultaneously paying homage to the EC comics of the 1950s and the then very recent Italian zombie influx. Most of these critical assessments now appreciate the film for what it is, as they say, just a small scale ghost story, and I think it works for that. Rather than to try to be much more than that.
Ebert was always like a you could always see he would go back and reevaluate films all the time, and because he was one of the biggest critics of the thing. I think he called Carpenter one of the worst directors in Hollywood or something like that at the time, and then 30 years later, before he passed, he was like, oh, looking back on it now, it's pretty much a masterpiece.
Yeah, we talk about him a lot when we talk about horror movies on the show.
Oh yeah,
because he was always so all over the place. Like he would always condemn violence and talk about how violent and pointlessly violent horror movies were, but then he loved like Wes Craven's Last House on the Left, which is violent, like really, really violent. But then I will always remember his review of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, where it felt like that movie like beat up his puppy the way he wrote that review.
And I always like laugh like he shit all over the thing, but he gave Escape from LA 3 stars out of 4.
Yeah, like he was just always all over the place, man.
Yeah,
and
it was such a weird thing like that.
So that's why I know a lot of horror fans don't really love his assessments of certain horror movies because he never seemed consistent. I guess that was the best way to put it.
I think also like another thing that is like with horror films, like horror films are so niche anyway. It's like it's you're either a fan of horror or you're not. I feel like sometimes it's not always, there's some horror films that are critically acclaimed, but usually it's just like, oh, you have this very rabid following for these films.
Yeah, agreed. Oh, and just for comparison's sakes, the remake of The Fog has a very, very dismal 4% rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
Pretty high.
Man, probably too much for that one, man. It probably way too much. It made money. It had an $18 million budget. It made $46.2 million worldwide. So I guess it made someone at Revolution and Sony happy. But God, it's not good from what I remember. A part of me is tempted to rewatch it just to be like, oh, is it as bad as I remember? But I'm sure it still is. I don't even own it. I've been known to own some like bad horror movies just because they're horror movies. Like I'll just go back and revisit it. I don't have that one. So I would have to find it and locate it.
I don't know, but I'm not that determined. I'd rather just rewatch this one again.
Yeah. Do you have the 4K of The Fog?
No, I watched it on streaming. I don't have the DVD.
It looks great. It looks really good. It's probably the best I've seen it look. Yeah, it just shows how well shot that movie is, and just combination of his direction and Dean Cundy's cinematography. So again, so good. And it starts off that way. It starts off atmospheric, pretty much ends that way. I do, like we said earlier, it does feel like the movie just kind of ends. Like it's just like there's all this like chaos, and then it's almost like it almost feels like a not so much like a horror movie because it's like all this like madness, and then it's almost like, oh, it's all over. Like that's really kind of
that's why you have that one last jump scare at the end. That's all.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of his films kind of just ended like that, though. Like there wasn't,
Yeah.
It's another one of those things where like so many films are too long because they feel like they need an epilogue for their characters, and you don't need it all the time. Sometimes, just cut it off where you need to cut it off, and it's fine.
Yeah, I agree. You really don't need it. I mean, like because there's not more story to really tell with this. I mean, we already got what we needed, and
this is not a film that's built for a sequel.
Yeah, we know what they came for. They got what they wanted, and he's like, no, I still feel some kind of way. I'm gonna slice you down with my sword. Still pretty pissed off about all this stuff.
Yeah, there's no way to possibly make The Fog Returns.
No, not at all, not at all. Do you have any? If you want to, I mean, do you actually have how you would rank your John Carpenter movies? Like,
I have it here. I have it here in front of me.
Okay, because I kind of want to. I don't have mine. But I do want to hear it.
Well, I'll start from the bottom of the barrel then. So we'll start with number 19. So he has 19 theatrical releases.
Okay.
I've seen them all, and this is how my own personal feelings on them. So the worst is the worst because it was his last film and it's the film that he decided I'm done, I'm retiring now. You can tell he was half-hearted filming it, and that's The Ward.
Oh, is that the
Um,
one with freaking
uh,
is
Amber
Amber Heard?
Heard.
Is she in that?
Yeah,
Yeah, Amber Heard.
yeah,
Yeah,
it
she's in that.
is.
Yeah.
It's a bad film. Number 18 is Memoirs of an Invisible Man, which is with Chevy Chase.
Chevy
It was
Chase.
one of the few films where like the studios were willing to try to give him another shot at something big budget with a name actor, and it just didn't work. 17 is Village of the Damned.
I haven't watched that in so long.
Yeah, it's not great. I kind of watched it out of curiosity because Christopher Reeves was in it, and I was like, I hardly see him in anything other than Superman. So,
yeah.
Number 16 is Vampires.
Oh, James Woods.
James Woods, yeah.
James Woods.
So now we're starting to get the ones that are a little bit better, because I actually have a little soft spot in my heart for Ghost of Mars, which I have at 15.
Okay.
Escape from LA at 14. 13, I have Christine, which I know a lot of people would probably
love that movie.
argue with me on.
Yeah. I love that movie. Me and Jackson covered on here. It's fun, man.
I mean, just because I have it low on my list doesn't mean I don't like it. It's just probably the ones that are higher on the list are the ones that I've seen more because they're the ones that I enjoy the most. So,
yeah.
Number 12 is a film called Body Bags.
I have not
which
heard of that.
It is an anthology film.
Okay.
He is like, as much as he said he didn't like himself on camera, he plays a big role in this film. John Carpenter plays this like creepy coroner character who throughout the movie will open up a body bag and show you the body inside it and then tell you that person's story. So it's like you're hearing how they ended up dying and on his table in this film. And it's a weird movie because it almost feels like an HBO Tales from the Crypt like TV film, but it was an actual theatrical release. I have The Fog at 11. Sorry, I don't mean to hurt your feelings, but it's
no, it's all good. I mean, your 11 might be like a really good 11 though. Like you're right.
Yeah, it's a good 11. Like I do enjoy the film.
I got Jackson right now when Jackson gives like someone like he gives like a 2.5. I was like, well, that's low. You're like, well, it's not like a bad 2.5. Oh, okay.
Assault on Precinct 13. I have 10. I have number 9 is Starman. Number 8 is Dark Star, which if you haven't seen it, I recommend it, man. It's
I need to check it out.
Obviously a first film, but it's pretty fun.
Yeah.
Number 7, I have Prince of Darkness.
Good movie.
Good movie. Number 6 is In the Mouth of Madness.
Also good.
Awesome movie. And then here's my top 5. I have Escape from New York at 5. Halloween is number 4. Big Trouble in Little China at 3. The Thing at number 2, and They Live at number 1. And
see, I love how like uniquely different that is from everyone else's. Because like some people would be like, Halloween would be at number 1. Like Halloween would be higher.
Yeah, I can explain it to you. Like I think The Thing and Halloween are his 2 most well-made films and most like complete films.
Yeah.
They Live is number 1 for me because it's the first John Carpenter film I've ever seen, and it holds a place in my heart.
Entertainment value too, right?
Yeah, it's entertaining, and I love Roddy Piper.
Yeah.
The Thing I think is damn near perfect film. That's why it's number 2. Big Trouble in Little China is probably the one I've watched the most, just because it's like probably the most fun of all his films. It's like the closest he ever came to making like a true comedy.
Right.
Halloween has to be in the top 5 somewhere, so that's why it's at my number 4.
Yeah. if you go below that, you're like, oh, dude.
Yeah, I can't knock it out of the 5. And then Escape from New York is another classic, another one that I've seen multiple times. So.
Well, what's funny about the Halloween thing, because like I don't know if you saw Variety put out their list of the top 100 horror movies, and Halloween was at like number 16, and that infuriated a lot of like horror movie fans on X who were like, that's what the thing is. Like Variety, all these like Rolling Stone, they put out these lists. They're usually not written by people who love horror movies. They're just like 8 staff members on who are like, hey, like I like this movie. Like Hostel Part 2 is like at number 72, and The Nightmare on Elm Street was at 74 or 76. So they ranked Hostel Part 2 higher. I mean, I don't have anything against it, but it's not better than The Nightmare on Elm Street.
Like, Nightmare on Elm Street should be in the top 10.
Yeah, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre was number 1. I can't really like fault that because it is a masterpiece in its own right. So like I was fine with that, but I do understand like people being upset like with Halloween missing like the top 10 where it's like outside of that. But those lists are always going to be like problematic and controversial because, like,
Yeah.
they're usually not written by true horror fans anyway. So that's
I
another
was going to say, I was
issue.
expecting to hear like Hereditary was number one or Midsummer or something like that because
Oh, they're trying to be different, to be
because they're
different,
artistic.
current.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Horror
elevated
films,
horror
but they're
films.
also artistic. Yeah.
Yeah, as the new Scream franchise mentioned, like, yeah, they're elevated. Hereditary wasn't the list. I forgot what number it was at, but it was on the list.
I would think that's probably in the top 10 somewhere, just based on how you're describing this list to me.
I was surprised by some of the placement. I think Scream was 25, and something,
Wow.
yeah. So it was a all over the place. Like, I think someone described it as like, it seems like they just had a wheel and they're just throwing darts, and then they're like, yeah, that works.
When I talk about like my favorite horror films, like Halloween's always in my top 5, and Hellraiser is my number 1. I've talked about that on the show with you before. Like I love Hellraiser.
That's another
But
one
I really like
movie.
I think Cabin in the Woods needs to get more attention.
Yeah, it really
I love
does.
that film. I think it's great. And 30 Days a Night's another really good one that I don't think gets enough attention.
Also really good.
So yeah,
we had that on the list too. I love that movie. There's a lot more attention than it gets.
Yeah, and my other like
well done.
really I love this film, and it's the other one I had suggested to you was Event Horizon. You ever decide to do that one, please have me on because I love that movie.
I need to. It's so funny that you mentioned that because Jackson's trying to fit in like 1 or 2 more of these while we're like kind of in the month of October, and he picked The Descent and Event Horizon. I know he's already watched The Descent. So if he does
Descent's
find
another
time to
good
do
one.
it, yeah, it's really good. That shit's scary before the fucking monsters show up.
Yeah.
But
claustrophobic.
if we have if we can work out that scheduling, I would love to have you on for that because we talked about that movie before, like briefly on another episode, and didn't get to really fully go into it. And that's just a really another well done sci-fi horror movie that at the time,
another one ruined by studios.
Yeah.
The director's cut we're never going to get.
Never. But it's something that never. And that's the real shame because like when you read about like what the intentions were and like what could have been and like that's unfortunate, but it holds up pretty well for what it is. I mean,
it's still great. I think I actually just watched it a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it's solid. So this point of the show where if you want to give any final thoughts on The Fog and also your score, and you can score it however you want. We do the letterbox 1 through 5 stars, letter grade 1 through 10, whatever you want to do. The floor is yours.
I would give it if I was giving it the letterbox like 5 stars, I would give it a solid like 3.5.
Okay.
Not a perfect film, but not one of his worst and not one of the worst horror films I've ever seen. It's really one of it's one that I find enjoyable. I could watch again, and it's like you said with cinematography, the atmosphere, the ghosts especially. I love the ghosts. I don't know what Ebert was saying with them not being original, with them being predictable or whatever it was, but I feel they're it's amazing because you never really get a clear look at what they look like either, which makes them, I think, more menacing to me.
I think we only have that one close up of the one where I don't know if she hits it with something or you get the worm thing on the face.
Yeah, a little bit of worms on the face, or you get the red eyes, and that's about it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I mean, I think for Ebert, it's probably because there's no like central villain, right? There's no one to like kind of latch on to as like.
He likes a well structured. He likes a well structured hero's journey.
Yeah, it seems like it. I've been doing this a lot lately, and I know it's kind of a cop out because I can't quite give it a 4. I would give it a 3.5, but I think I've been like, but close to like a 3.7, 3.8 kind of thing.
That's why I said I gave it a solid 3.5.
It's a really solid ghost story, and like you said, it's atmospheric, and like I said, I love the ensemble nature of the cast too. I love that, like I said, that the characters feel lived in, like the setting feels lived in, so you like kind of feel like you're in there with them. And there's something like a little like we're oddly comforting about the movie too, where you're just kind of like immersed in like its story and like what it's selling you.
It's the kind of movie I would show to somebody if they said that they're not a big fan of horror. I would be like, this is one you can watch because it's not gory. It's not going to really like jump out at you like some films do. It's just a really good ghost story, and you can tell like he was really determined to make it a PG film because I think he wanted it to be like something that like families can watch together.
Yeah,
And it was the studio that forced him to think it has an R rating, which I don't even think it really deserves.
No, not at all, because I don't think there's any like real language in it, right? Like,
There's no language. There's no blood at all.
The kills are like, you don't see anything. There's no gore.
Yeah, they're pretty quick, and yeah. But I think if he was able to make it was a PG version he wanted, it would still work because it's I think it's a good way to introduce people to horror if they're not, if they're trepidatious about it.
Yeah, it's a solid entry level horror movie. You're right, it's not too scary and it's not gory. I think for like some people who don't really like horror movies, they can feel like, oh, I'm watching like it's a film rather than like, oh, like we were talking about this earlier, where like certain movies are like clearly horror movies, but some people like actors will be in them. They're like, well, I think it's more like a psychological thriller. They don't want to call it a horror movie. Yeah.
Like no, Silence of the Lambs is a psychological thriller.
Yeah, exactly.
You were into Green Inferno. That's not a psychological
thriller at all. Well, Leo, thank you for joining me on this episode.
Thank you for having me again,
because I've been wanting to talk about it too as well. Tell everyone where they can find the Films and Fermentation podcast.
All right, yes. As I said at the beginning of the show, myself and my friends Kevin and Mike, we host the Films and Fermentation podcast, movie and alcohol podcast. We are on all the podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple Pods, Good Pods, all of them. You can go to linktree.com/films and fermentation to find all of our social media and podcast links. So please check us out.
We'll definitely do that, and we will be linking all your info at the bottom of the description of this episode as well, so you guys can click on that to find all their stuff too. If you like what you heard, you can listen to us at those same places, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods. Those are all really great. We also have the playlist to do that, but you should also check out in the iOS store or the Google Play Store. They are a podcast network, and they do a lot of the heavy lifting for us that we can't do on our own because we're all very busy. So thank you, playlist, for always taking care of us. You can also find us on YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will be adding more stuff to that soon. As soon as Jackson is done with his school schedule, he has a few more weeks of this kind of busy schedule that he's on, but he will be ready to come back full force once he's done. Like I said, we have more Tales of Horror episodes as of this recording coming up. We are filling up the rest of October with all horror movie related podcast episodes, so that'll be really fun. I think I only have it's always feels like almost the Christmas Day kind of thing. Like I'm so happy to cover horror movies during this time, and then it's this weird feeling when it's like over. I think I only have like 2 or 3 more of these to record, unless someone throws in another one randomly. And I've done a lot of them so far since September that we are still in the process of releasing. So it's just been really fun. Everyone's picked really good, interesting movies and all different types of movies, not just stuff from like the big franchises, but we've had some horror comedies on there, some lesser known horror films too. So that's been a fun thing about doing it again this year, is that we just didn't go for the typical stuff. So that was, makes it a lot more fun and interesting. So check out all of that. And also, we also do milestone movie anniversaries. I will probably share the list of those with you, Leo, so you can maybe hop on a movie anniversary episode if you see anything that you really want to do. We are also doing all of that too. We are, by the time you'll hear this, we'll be at over 200 episodes, and that is exciting too. So
congratulations on that.
Yeah. Thank you. I can't believe it's been that long. It's crazy because Jackson hasn't been here from the beginning. He's been on, we found out, over, I think it's 134. It feels like he's been there since the beginning, but he's done a lot in a very relatively short amount of time. So we're just excited about what the future holds and what we're going to do once his schedule clears up. And
we're closing in on you a little bit. We're recording episode 170 this week, so
oh nice. Yeah, I think we actually talked about that when we did I think when we were doing Hellraiser and Dark Knight, how we kind of were like, seems like we were around the same time. Sometimes we just get crazy and we like release 2 a week. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, like we're pretty consistent with just like 1 a week because our schedules are such that like we could really only record 1 day a week, and so it's like we're trying to fit that into the schedule. Sometimes doesn't work. I would love to do more than 1 episode a week if I could.
Yeah, it gets it's one of the things where it's so fun, but it's stressful, but in a good way. There's a lot of work. But the end result is very nice because the episodes come out good, and then we get to meet people like you that come on and help us out as well. So that's always a good time, and I'm glad we made this work. For everyone that's listening right now, it took a while to do this because there was like I had computer issues last week, and then like recordings went long on another day because if it just overbook yourself sometimes. I'm glad that this worked out finally.
The inconvenience of you living in LA and me living in New Jersey.
Yeah. Here's the deal. I need to meet, as much as I love, the East Coast guest friends, Midwest guest friends.
Mhm.
I, for some reason, can't find a lot of like LA guest friends, which would make it a lot easier to be like, yo, like I'm good to go at like 4. Like, oh, I'm good to go at 4 too, or I'm good to go later.
Like I said, man, like during the summertime, I record whenever. It don't matter to me, but I'm a teacher, so during the wintertime, it's a little tough.
So you gotta be that, yeah. And I've become the king of making it work because Jackson's 4 hours ahead in New Brunswick, Canada. So
yeah,
I've had to make it work. So I'm always willing to do it for stuff like this. So thank you again for being on. Thank you again for
thank you for having me.
And we will see you next time, guys. Peace out.